Good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world, afternoon or morning, perhaps. Thank you for coming in to this live stream, this webinar with TalentoTotal and Howard University. We really are excited to provide this presentation today, especially for all of the aspiring lawyers out there. It's a pleasure for you to be here, and it's a pleasure for us to also be here. So I'll go ahead and kick it off with a quick intro of myself and our two guests here, and then we'll provide a quick overview of how the event will go today in terms of the agenda, and then we'll jump into it. And at the end, we'll wrap it up with a few questions for anyone in the audience. So I am Jim McCrary. I'm the founder and CEO of TalentoTotal. We are a nonprofit organization operating primarily in Latin America, and we accelerate the careers of Afro-descendant and indigenous young professionals. And we have the pleasure of being joined by Reggie McGahee of Howard University Law School, or Howard Law School, and also Tonia Hope Naves of the Bunch Center at Howard University as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our presentation really quickly. And let me go ahead and share my screen. All righty. So can everyone see that? Okay, I believe so. All right. So as I mentioned, the three of us will be on this webinar today. And here's a quick agenda overview. I'll go ahead and talk about the TalentoTotal and Advanced Center partnership, and also the Total Law Prep program, which is one of the signature programs of our organization, where we provide an opportunity to support young professionals who are Afro-descendant or indigenous in pursuing an LLM in the United States or Europe. Then I'll hand it off to Tonia, who will talk about her role at the Ralph J. Bunch Center, and we'll then hand it off to Reggie McGahee of the Howard Law School, and then we'll wrap it up, as I said before, with the Q&A towards the end. And that is it for the agenda. So first slide here, we have just an overview of who we are and the partnership that we formed with the Cyrus Vance Center for International Justice. The Vance Center is a nonprofit program of the New York City Bar Association, located in New York, obviously. And we had an opportunity to connect with the Vance Center almost a year ago. And we noticed that there was a particular lack of representation, especially in LLM programs in the United States and Europe, when it came to Afro-descendant or Black and indigenous lawyers. And so we also noticed that there was quite a diversity challenge as well when it came to law firms and other organizations spread across Latin America. So in partnering together via this initiative, we've kind of leveraged each other's resources, especially with the Vance Center being connected to several hundred law firms and over, I want to say 800 law firm lawyers, many of which who have volunteered to support this initiative called the Total Law Prep program. And so we're excited to have partnered with the Vance Center, and we hope to continue to do amazing work in the future. Now, the Total Law Prep program selects fellows among Afro-descendant and indigenous law school students in their last year, and also recent graduates. We have several countries that we focus on primarily, Brazil and Colombia, but over the past year or two, TalentoTotal, and as a benefit of the Vance Center, we've been able to tap into other countries and realize that there's a diversity need in countries like Mexico, Panama, Peru, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Bolivia, et cetera. And so as the years go by and as we venture into new countries, we're going to look to support more Black and indigenous lawyers with this program. What I'll go into next, one key feature of the Total Law Prep program is that each candidate is paired with a coach who either earned an LLM or a JD at a top tier program in the United States. And we also provide a mentorship aspect through a number of law firm lawyers who have volunteered to act as mentors and provide mentorship training. Here's the program cycle. Essentially in year 0, which is the first year that you're entering the program, we have a 12-month period where we provide you with this personalized guidance, where we provide you with coaching in terms of preparing for the LLM application. How do you write a personal statement? How do you write your essays? How do you craft your resume or CV? How do you prepare for interviews? All of these things that are such critical elements of the application process is something that we really focus in on and try to provide this type of guidance to aspiring lawyers who are accepted into the Total Law Prep program. Year number 1 is where you are attending your LLM program in the United States or Europe, and obviously receiving a top-notch education. And our focus generally, based on what we've seen in terms of the lack of representation across law firms, is oriented towards the business and corporate sector. However, in this year's class, we do have several lawyers who are focused on human rights and civil rights law. So that is another feature of the program as well. And the TLP, or Total Law Prep fellows, are encouraged to prepare for the U.S. bar because there may be an opportunity to transition into an international associate program in year 2. Which you will have the opportunity to work and live in the United States or a European country to partner or to work as a part of a global law firm in their IAP program. And then the last year, or year 3, which is the most important year, is the year that you are to return to your home country and ultimately support us in accomplishing the mission of the organization and this partnership, which is to help diversify law firms and organizations, and especially amongst the leadership ranks, senior partners in law firms, et cetera. And so that is the complete life cycle for the Total Law Prep program as we envision it. And we hope to see more of you applying in the years to come. And we look forward to working with the candidates who have been selected for this year. So what I'll do next is hand it off to Tonia Hope Naves, who is the director of the Bunch Center at the Howard University, to talk a little bit about her work, her experience in Latin America, some of the work that she's done across the region, and how she has really kind of created a niche for Howard University to do some fantastic work with Afro-descendant communities in a number of countries throughout Latin America. So with that being said, I'm going to back out of this deck and I'm going to hand it off to you, Tonia. Let me stop sharing the screen. Awesome.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thank you to Jim and to TalentoTotal group for having this platform and offering it to Howard University. Really excited that we were able to pull this together. My name is Tonia Hope Navas. I'm the director of the Ralph J. Bunch International Affairs Center at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Just to tell you a little bit about Howard generally, Howard was founded in 1867, so it's 153 years old. It is a historically Black university, so it was founded originally with the intent of educating people of African descent. So not all of the students at Howard University are of African descent, but a majority of them are. And the curriculum, I think, reflects that and takes that into account in the way that Howard University approaches teaching and learning. So unique in that way. But there are 104 other historically Black colleges and universities in the United States, but Howard is the best. So about me, before I came to Howard, I've been at Howard for 5 years, and prior to working at Howard University, I was the executive director for North America for the Baobab Fund for Racial Equity, which is a Brazilian organization. Prior to that, I used to work at Philip Stokes, which is an organization that did a lot of work in Colombia. So when I met Jim and learned that he was working both in Colombia and Brazil, I was very excited because the work that I was involved in was focused mostly on Afro-descendant populations and indigenous populations. So, and providing access to opportunities, education, etc. So when I came to Howard University, being that is a historically Black university, I wanted to find a way to better connect Howard University to Latin America. I don't feel that Howard is plugged in the way that it should be, and vice versa. And I would really like to see more people from Latin America attending Howard University. And that is where TalentoTotal comes in. I can't see who is watching this, who's registered, but I'm sure that I have friends there. So thanks for coming, and please spread the word. But I was really excited when I approached Reggie from the law school about figuring out a way to do some outreach to Latin America through different avenues. And so when TalentoTotal came with this law program, I said, this is a great opportunity to bring these two parts of my world together. And so I'm really excited that Reggie is here to tell you all more about the law school. The Bunch Center, the law school is on a separate campus from the main campus. The Bunch Center is located on the main campus. And at the Bunch Center, we are responsible for most of the study abroad for the university, primarily for undergraduate students, but and getting them out into the world for a semester or a year. But we also do programming. So we host lecture series and different events that are open to the whole university and the greater community that focus on different global issues. We bring experts from a variety of fields. We try to be very interdisciplinary so that everyone that attends events at the Bunch Center is not from political science, and everybody's not from history or language department. We try to make events appealing to everyone in every discipline, because at this point in the 21st century, everyone in every discipline has an obligation really to have an international perspective and understand the way in which the world works. So we host a variety of different events and speakers and so forth. And we try to support all of the schools and colleges. So there are 13 schools and colleges at our university. The law school is just one of them. And we try to work with all of them to support them in their global goals and objectives, to figure out how we can help them build partnerships, how they can help them recruit students, bring speakers, put together events, conduct research, etc. We just try to be a resource for them. And then we run some fellowship programs that are sponsored by the Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. So those are kind of all of the things that we do at the Bunch Center. And you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and you can go to our website, global.howard.edu. That has links to all of the social media and everything. And we try to share information for the Howard community, but also future Bison, which I hope that you might be. So I'm done. I'm going to pass it to Reggie.
Well, thank you, Tania and Jim, for such wonderful information, and I think a wonderful introduction into the conversation that we're having today about not only Howard University and its law school, but our partnership globally to make sure that Afro-descendant peoples are given an opportunity to share in the beautiful tradition and history and culture that I believe that Howard University represents across the planet. We are a global institution, and we are happy to have this opportunity to speak to you today and share some, and just through the program at the law school, one of the opportunities that we can provide for education and outreach and partnership. I'll speak briefly about the School of Law, but I do think that the most important part of our conversation will come from the question and answer, so we'll leave plenty of time for that. So as Tania mentioned, the law school, or the university, is celebrating 153 years. The law school is celebrating 151 years. So we're very well steeped in the culture of teaching students from a foundation of law. And our job is to make sure that we stand in the gap to make sure that we fight for equality, social justice, and diversity across the planet. the wonderful thing about this program is that when Jim mentioned it to us, and we saw a definite need to support such a wonderful plan, is that there's a lack of diversity in many Afro-Brazilian based cultures, where there's a lot of companies, there's a lot of organizations that are thriving and building relationships off the peoples of those lands, but then you see very few representations of people that look like us in courtrooms and boardrooms and at the tables where decisions are being made. Howard's Law School, specifically its LLM program for international applicants, has been working to close that gap for generations. Our LLM program is well over 30 years old, and through that time, we've educated students in Thailand, in Africa, throughout the Caribbean, and definitely throughout Latin America. And we want to continue building on that pipeline. And our graduates now hold leadership positions as judges, as legal scholars, as teachers, and as practitioners across the globe. And we're very proud of that. And we hold that as an important part of our legacy as our US-based graduates. Once you're a part of the Bison family, once you're a Howard alum, it's for life. And we expect, and there's an obligation, I think, at Howard beyond just being a great professional, but you should be attracted to this university because you have an idea of a better society. And then you want to come to this institution to be trained in a particular field of study, in a particular profession, so that you can take that indoctrination and that knowledge and go back and help our people. And that's essentially why I'm a partner to Howard University, where I'm proud to be an employee here. That being said, our LLM program is a one-year program. In order to be an international student and come into the LLM program, you have to have an LLB or an equivalent law degree from your home country. At that time that you want to transition into the States, you must have an English language proficiency exam, either the EIDL test or the TOEFL, and you must give us your transcripts to show your academic background and performance. We also ask for some type of thesis statement that explains your interest in studying the LLM program so that we can make sure that your career goals are aligned with our program. We typically have students that will study international affairs, international business, international human rights and civil rights. But we also have enough flexibility within our curriculum where you can study intellectual property, you can study taxation, you can study international business development and sustainable development. So we have a very broad curriculum to address many needs, many perspectives, and many educational interests. With that being said, I've placed a link to our LLM program that should be shared with you at this point in the chat. And if you have any questions from here, we'll be happy to answer those questions. So thank you for your time.
Reggie, I'm back, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that link that you mentioned into the chat as well, and also highlight it for everyone to see if they can. So I think we had a question come up from Cesar, and that question was regarding fellowships. Can you see that, Reggie, Antonia? The question from Cesar. So just a little background on him. Cesar is Colombian and from the fantastic island archipelago of San Andres y Providencia. So he is Raizal, and he's one of the candidates who has been accepted into the Total Law Prep program for this year. So one of the big questions that I get, and it's very similar to this, is about fellowships and scholarships. So I think this is a really good question because that's almost the first question that's always asked: how do I pay for it? And I think that's a key concern for a lot of Afro-descendant or Black and Indigenous people who don't come from, well-to-do families or don't have the financial resources to travel across the world and attend a school in a relatively expensive city. So I'll leave it to you all to kind of provide your feedback on what you've seen from international students and with regard to the fellowship programs.
So I'll speak specifically about this Harris Fellowship because that is something that we do administer from the Bunch Center. It is not a tuition fellowship. I'll leave that to Reggie, but the Patricia Roberts Harris Fellowship is a fellowship that was created many years ago. It's been dormant for 12 years. We just restarted it this year, but it is open to all Howard University students, both undergraduate and graduate. So a law student is eligible. However, it's a 1-year fellowship that provides a mentor that is with you for the duration of the year, and then you are required to do an internship in the summertime, and then in the fall you have to kind of help recruit and promote the fellowship for the next cohort. So a person in an LLM, it might be difficult because you're typically only there for 1 year. So that follow-up piece might be challenging, and the internship also might be a little bit challenging. But you can apply and we can see if we can work it out. But it provides a stipend only for domestic or international internships. So for example, if you were to do an internship in the summertime and you wanted to do the internship at, I don't know, The Hague or something, this fellowship would provide some funding to be able to do the fellowship at The Hague. It depends how much, depending on how much is needed and so forth. But that's what it was meant to do. It was meant to provide stipends for internships in the summertime.
Thank you. And I'll follow up with that in that, I think in many situations when we discuss the cost of attending an institution of higher education, the first start of the evaluation is in scholarship funds. And I think that that's a very appropriate place to provide more information. But I think sometimes it's important to also understand what the institution provides for its tuition and its fees. Howard works very diligently and very consistently to keep our tuition and fees down in general, so that every student is afforded a good, strong, quality education without having to jump the high burden of finding an extreme amount of money to pay for those access to those tools. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not expensive or that there's not some value added to that, but we try to keep our tuition down in comparison to many of our cohorts in the marketplace. So for example, in Washington, D.C., Howard's tuition is typically about half of what you'll find for most of the major law schools in the D.C. area. And we do that purposefully because we don't want cost to be a barrier. Now, typically LLM students are not eligible for the traditional funding sources that domestic students are eligible for. Most students that attend Howard, if they borrow money for law school, they're using money based upon their status as a U.S. citizen. We do offer merit-based scholarships. There is a limited amount of scholarship dollars for LLM students, but that's where we try to affect that population by keeping the tuition low. We do offer fellowships on our law school, primarily in our Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, so that students can obtain training and some type of skill development while they're also studying. But as Tania mentioned, it is a 1-year program. So in many cases, it's a very quick turnaround that the students are on campus, and then with the expectation that they'll return back to their home country at the completion of the program.
Excellent. I think we have another question as well that came from Fidel Gustavo. And I think you can both see it there, but he says, hello, I would like to know what are the main aspects analyzed for the admission of students to the LLM program?
Wonderful question. And I briefly mentioned a few of these topics when I was explaining the program earlier, but every student must submit an application that just gives a biographical background as to who the person is and what their interests are. That should include a resume, so we see some of your professional development. Also, there's your thesis statement or some type of professional writing that explains your interest in our program and what you hope to do after you have obtained the skill set and the knowledge in advancing your home country or in your profession. We also ask for, especially for the immigration issue, we ask for your photo. We ask for your interest statements. You have to make sure that you have your I-20 and your F1 visa process complete so that we can be in compliance with having a student on campus. And then we ask that you be very mindful of deadlines, because there are issues beyond just admitting a student into the program, primarily the INS or immigration issues. We ask that students get their information in as soon as possible so that we can work with them to get their visa and their I-20 so that they can be processed and issued acceptance and brought into the institution with as little obstacles as possible.
Awesome. I got another question, and this is kind of from me. I always say to a lot of the candidates and prospective candidates in the program, like, I don't have a JD, I don't have a law degree, so I'm learning. I guess I would be similar to a student who hasn't been to a law school yet, and they have a lot of questions. So for me, I think the big one, and this is, pertains to our program. What do you think are the biggest challenges for students who come from Latin America or abroad in general when they get to DC? Is it more adjusting to the city? Is it the academics? Is it the culture shock? Is it the cost of living in DC, because it can be relatively expensive, let's say, compared to a state school that may be in a small town? So from your perspective, and I think this is a good question for you as well, Tonia, since you kind of work back and forth as well. What would you say, like, are the two biggest challenges for international students?
Well, I would say first in the classroom is probably the strength of their English language skills. The program is completely taught and spoken in English. All assignments are due in English. And I know that many students will have proficiency in their language skills, but I think the relative strength of their language skills will have an impact on how relatively easy the program feels to the student. It's a challenging program regardless, but the strength of the underlying skill set will have some impact on how successful they are in completing the program. Secondarily, I think it's the cultural adjustment with the caveat of the cost of DC. That can be a major adjustment. I think DC is a wonderful city. I think it's truly one of those international cities where you can see everything that is offered in the world. But it's also a very small city, so you get that in a very condensed space. So I think that can be an advantage where you get an international city, but it's not as broad or as large as some other international cities. So you can get a lot in a small place. But I do think that it can be overwhelming depending on where the person is coming from and what society they're used to or have grown up in. But I think that that's another wonderful thing about Howard University. Most students, when you ask them to describe their Howard University experience, one of the first things that they will mention is the community and the family feel of the environment. We are very proud to say that our students seem to have a wonderful knack at forming family and relationships and supporting and providing opportunities for each other and making sure that they don't leave anyone behind. So, you're going to make wonderful friends at our institution. They're going to be lifelong friends. And I think that that's one of the hallmarks of a wonderful institution are the connections and the networks that you're open into and that you will be a part of upon completion.
I wouldn't add anything. I think language is typically the biggest obstacle, the biggest challenge. So, but other than that, I think the transition and the adaptation should be fairly easy.
Okay.
That Reggie said.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think we got the next question from Hane. And her question is, do students participate in co-curricular or extracurricular activities, i.e. or e.g. moot court, mock trial? I don't know what those are, Reggie. So please enlighten us.
Sure, I'm happy to. Fortunately, there are many co-curricular and extracurricular programs at our law school. Unfortunately for the LLM students, the co-curricular programming is typically not included in the LLM program because you are coming in as a professional already, and the JD students are still earning their first degree. So we don't necessarily think it's fair to place both of those groups on the same competing teams. And most law schools wouldn't allow an LLM student unless there's an LLM specific competition to compete with JD students. However, we do try to provide opportunities for students to engage and be a part of the community through extracurricular activities. Any LLM student can join any extracurricular organization or club on campus. They can participate in all functions and events on campus. And as I mentioned before, our centers like the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, our Intellectual Property and Social Justice Institute, our criminal justice clinics. They can volunteer and participate in those as well. So we want to make sure that they know that they're a part of the community, but there are certain aspects like co-curricular that an LLM student would not participate with.
And I have something just to follow up or add or an additional question. You mentioned Thurgood Marshall. So, you know, we have a lot of international students, you know, who are attracted to the program and obviously here in this webinar. So can you kind of explain who Thurgood Marshall is? Can you explain like some of the history surrounding Howard University, Howard Law School, the prominent Afro-Americans and Afro-descendants who have graduated from the institution, and what the institution means and represents for the Black community in the United States? And hopefully, you know, through this process, as we bring in more Afro-Colombians, more Afro-Brazilians, what it will mean for the diaspora as a whole and globally.
Well, you know, that seems like a whole nother chat we could start. But
hey, let's go.
I'm trying to answer that as succinctly as I can. So I think in order to properly understand Thurgood Marshall, you have to first understand Charles Hamilton Houston. Charles Hamilton Houston is considered the father of the modern day Howard University School of Law. Charles Hamilton Houston was a dean at Howard University School of Law, and he coined the phrase that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And essentially what that means is that a lawyer will have a skill set, a training, an ability, and they can use that ability to take from society, or they can use that ability to encourage the growth and the development of society. And we expect every graduate to come from Howard University School of Law to be the latter, to be a person that went inserted into a community, that they made the community better, not just through their presence, but also in the proper use of their skill set. Thurgood Marshall is a product of that mentality and of that training by Charles Hamilton Houston, and through their partnership, along with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and many other prominent lawyers, they are considered to have put together a roadmap and a toolkit that helped to dismantle Jim Crow and racial segregation throughout our country, primarily through the landmark court decision of Brown versus Board of Education. That allowed for the proper integration of public institutions along the idea that there was a flawed concept of separate but equal. And Thurgood Marshall was a part of the legal team that helped pretty much dismantle the idea that that was possible, which led to the integration of our society. Thurgood Marshall also went on to become the first African-American justice to sit on the United States Supreme Court, which is the highest court on the land in the United States. Now, I think Howard itself as an entity has a footprint that permeates through most cultures and most societies, because I say this very humbly. I think many nations look to what the struggle has been for the African American in the U.S. to get some clues to how they can work against oppression and a segregated society in their home nations. And we're happy to partner and try to be that beacon, but also to be that partner to help evolve and eventually get to a sense of freedom for all of us across this globe. No matter whether you're Afro-Brazilian or Afro-Cuban or Afro-Latino, or whether you are Venezuelan or without African descent, there is still a hierarchy of color in our world that we know we have to dismantle that, period, for there ever to be true equality and true justice and true fairness across our globe. Howard is at the center of that. I don't think our institution would exist without being true to those goals, those ideas, and that notion that we can have a better society. And I think if there is a personification of that, then Thurgood Marshall would be that personification, because he dedicated his entire life to making sure that there was some form of or some advancement towards equality. There are countless phenomenal Howard Law graduates, some that you may be aware of and some that you may have not. I encourage you to look up Howard University School of Law and gain access to some of our more prominent graduates. But our graduates aren't just built into history. We have many prominent graduates today that are still helping fight for equality and advancement. And while we're still at our core a civil rights institution, civil rights bleeds over into intellectual property. It bleeds over into corporate law. It bleeds over into tax. It bleeds over into so many different practice areas that, despite for civil rights, will continue until we are equal, until we are fairly balanced and fairly judged. And so that means that that's a fight that we all have to be committed to. So I know that I said a lot, and I'm not sure if I said enough, but I think that trying to give a snapshot into Howard is difficult at best. But I would definitely encourage many people, if you're interested, to just look up Howard University School of Law, Thurgood Marshall, Charlotte Ray, Douglas Wilder, Letitia James, Charles King. There are so many graduates of our institution. Judge Gabrielle Kirk McDonald. There's so many graduates that if you start to just type in Howard University School of Law and notable alums, you'll be amazed. And these aren't just our graduates that have practiced domestically, but our graduates have practiced internationally as well. And I just feel that I would do the institution a disservice if I didn't give you tools to find them versus trying to give you, I would think, an incomplete litany of all the wonderful people that have come through the institution.
No, that's fantastic, Reggie. And I think they'll have to just go to Howard University to find out more, right?
We would love to have each and every one of you.
So the next question is from Karina, and she says, hello, everyone. Does Howard University have a look at the history of Blacks in its LLM program, or are the subjects specifically for U.S. law subjects in general?
Good question. Well, I think Howard does a wonderful job of looking at the law first and then seeing how the law impacts communities of color. Now, there will be specific courses that may deal with African Americans or Afro-Brazilians or Africans in general, or Afro-Colombians or Afro-Latinos specifically based upon the subject matter that you're studying. So, for example, if there's a course in international law, then you may have more of an opportunity to discuss the impact of law on a foreign country. But there will be a lot of race, law, and class courses that you will have access to, or even sustainable development and how that may impact a country in Africa or in Latin America. So I think across our curriculum, you will see the way that the law influences, impacts, strengthens, or weakens communities of color routinely discussed throughout the lecture. And I think that that's, like I said before, another hallmark of our institution is that we don't, the impact on communities of color are not afterthoughts in our conversations. You don't have to raise your hand and bring up the topic to find out what was the impact on the community of color. It's usually woven into the conversation in a very direct and purposeful way, so that we can see how laws can help and or hinder us, so that we can help take that information back and help our communities in general.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that response, Reggie. And we have a question from Udio. I think I'm saying his name correctly, Gonzalez. And it's a question in Spanish, but I'll go ahead and translate it for you here. And if we have some Spanish speakers who understand Reggie's response, they can go ahead and write that response for Udio in the chat. Basically, he says, if a person who immigrated from his or her country and has had time without doing activities in their particular profession, I suppose that's, not a lot of experience. Can they apply? And also taking into account that in your country, you carried out many activities related to the program. So I guess the question is kind of how much experience do you need, I suppose, in the legal profession if you're applying to an LLM program as an international student?
I think that's a wonderful question. I don't think that there's a critical mass or a baseline amount of qualification as much as there is a vision and goal that the applicant articulates. So we want to know why this step is important to you, why you feel that you can grow and learn and take information away from our law school, but also add value to our institution. So I think that starts in the application process with the applicant's ability to explain, why is this an important step in your career and life goals? And then we can help evaluate and critique and make sure that we offer you the very thing that you're looking for. And ultimately, we want you to leave the law school better positioned to get to that goal than you were coming into our institution. So I think the true answer isn't how much work you've done before you get to law school, even though we do want to see your professional development in your resume. The true question is, what vision of yourself do you have, and how do you see our law school fitting into that vision? And then how have you demonstrated that you prepared yourself, in addition to applying to the law school, to make it down the pathway to that goal. And the applicants that do the best job in that are the ones that we try to give as many opportunities to based upon the available space in our class every year.
Awesome. I think we have another question from Hane, and she says, does the school specialize in any area of law? What are some of the biggest centers and programs anchored in Howard Law School?
Good question. Well, we are traditionally a civil rights institution, as I mentioned earlier. However, the civil rights notion and ideal is more of a concept than it is just a practice area of law. But don't get me wrong, there is civil rights law. However, we have very successful graduates that, as I mentioned before, go into corporate law and business transactional law. We have many graduates that go into intellectual property or criminal law. So it's more about understanding that our job as a law school first is to make sure that you're a phenomenal practitioner, that you can understand, process, read, write, and communicate the law, period. Then our job is to help you identify your interest and then to show you how to master that area of law so that when you leave our law school, you have the tools, the passion, and the intellect to be able to pursue any area of law that you're interested in. Now, the great thing about the LLM program and the fact that the graduates tend to already, or not tend to, but definitely already have their first law degree, is that you should have a very clear understanding of the practice of law at the point that you're applying to the law school. That may go back to the question of how much experience should a person have. I think the experience question is best answered by how much experience does one need to properly understand the practice of law and how they can use their talents to be the best practitioner. Coming back to the law school or coming to the law school to obtain your LLM allows you to focus in a particular area of law so that you can get the nuances, learn very strategically how to enhance your knowledge in that area of law so that you can go back and help your career flourish. So as far as specializations, we try to create a very general curriculum so that as you step in for that year, you can take courses across the curriculum based upon your interest and still satisfy the requirements of the LLM program. But traditionally, we are a civil rights institution. As far as centers and programs, we have intellectual property, we have civil rights, we have criminal law, we have international business transactions. As I mentioned before, we have sustainability, we have entrepreneurship, and the ways that law, and that's just a few. You can find many more of those areas on our website, but it's also the way that the law influences those areas and how anyone that masters those areas will be able to influence those arenas as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Reggie. I want to bring Tonia into the conversation and tell us a little bit more about the Bunch Center. So what is kind of like, I guess, the key focus of the center, and how do you, or what would you say is so important about this cross-cultural connectivity between Afro-descendant people in Latin America and the United States? And what does that mean, not only for education, but also for professional opportunities, even business opportunities, and learnings across cultures?
Sure. So, I mean, I think most people at Howard, when they think of the Bunch Center, they think about study abroad. And if we're going to talk about study abroad, that means specifically our mostly undergraduate students going out into the world for a semester to study at another school in another country. What that means for me and what we're trying to do at the Bunch Center is not necessarily say, okay, you have to go to these particular places because that's where Black people are. But we do want to provide opportunities for people of the African diaspora to connect. We created a study abroad program about 2 years ago that takes place in Cali, Colombia, with Universidad del Valle. And the focus of that program is Afro-Colombian race, ethnicity, and identity. And it focuses on Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. And the purpose of that is, one, because African Americans in the United States do not tend to participate in study abroad activities. We also don't tend to learn foreign languages in significant enough numbers for my taste anyway. But generally speaking, the numbers of African Americans that speak another language is very low. And I think that in order for us to be able to build those relationships across borders, we have to know each other. And so we have to get out. We in the United States have to get out into the world and meet our brothers and sisters and our cousins that look like us and all over the world, because we are all over the world. And those of us, our brothers and sisters and cousins all over the world, should also come to see us at Howard. And so we've been trying to facilitate those types of opportunities for students. It tends to be undergraduate students, but like I said, we try to support all of the schools and colleges at Howard University, some that are professional and graduate schools, so that they can also provide those opportunities for their students at the graduate and professional level. So we really just want to be able to connect people so that those business opportunities are born and prosper and grow, and we can support each other all over the world, wherever we find ourselves. But we have to get to know each other first, and we have to meet each other, and we have to be able to communicate with each other. So in the rest of the world, we need to learn English, and those of us here, we need to learn Spanish, Portuguese, French, etc., so that we can communicate directly without
intermediaries. Yeah, intermediaries. Yeah.
To change our message and like our sense of urgency. So
No, that's fantastic. I guess I have a question for you in response to that. What do you think is the biggest challenge for, let's say, an Afro-Colombian or Afro-Brazilian or Afro-Panamanian high school student if they have an interest in applying to and studying at Howard University? Like, what do you think are some of the key barriers, and what do you think we could do to create more opportunities for, Benedict College type of situation where you have so many Afro-Colombians who have gone there to study?
Well, language, as we mentioned before, I think language is the first and probably the biggest barrier. I was working in Brazil and Colombia for a long time, and even now, I continue to get messages from friends or friends of friends or children of friends who want to come and study at Howard University. But my first question is always, what is your English like? Because if you can't pass the TOEFL at a certain level, you're not going to be able to get into Howard in the first place. But once you're here, it's going to be very difficult. So to be able to really understand English, to be able to be in a classroom where everyone is speaking English, has to be a focus. And I know in Colombia, the Martin Luther King Scholars Program, or Fellows, I can never remember, Scholars, that is offered by USAID is a great program. I know I sent a message to the MLK folks in our WhatsApp group chat. So taking advantage of those opportunities to learn and practice English that the U.S. Embassy offers is very helpful. I think I feel like something like that might exist in Brazil, but I don't think it's quite as developed as it is in Colombia. And I think something like that, college pathways or horizons, I can't remember the name of it, exists in some other countries, Peru, I think, and maybe Ecuador. So just whatever opportunity you can to learn English in that formal way, or however you can. I know people who have learned English, watching videos on YouTube and watching television shows, and it's not an ideal, but it does help to be able to be conversational. Those types of things can be helpful. Practice whenever you can. The other issue is always going to be the funding. And as for foreign students, to get funding to come to study in the United States is always a challenge. But there are also ways. Unfortunately, Howard doesn't have many scholarships available. So finding funding in country, whether it's through a government program, I know I'm very familiar with Colombia. I know in Colombia there are ways, whether it's, not necessarily for law school, but for other, what was called ciencia, so ICETEX, all of these things that these funding mechanisms to be able to get loans or scholarships to study in another country, I think are all avenues. And in the past, I know that those avenues were not frequently used by people of African descent or indigenous people. So I think that the time has come for those agencies and those entities to fund all of the people in the country that they are. So
I agree with that. Hopefully we can create some impactful change in that regard and ensure that we have more Afro-descendant and indigenous young people able to attend Howard at the undergraduate level. We had a question from Kelis Moreno, and she believes that DC is a beautiful place and Howard has a beautiful campus, and it's a vibrant city. And I know she spent some time there. So she wants to know if you could talk about the advantages of going to Howard and being in DC.
I feel like we should hire her because, I don't know if we need to say anything else other than that wonderful way that she gave us a really softball question about the city. Now, Tania, I'll let you speak to it if you want, because I think you would do a wonderful job. But if not, then, I'm willing to as well.
I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C., so it would be very difficult for me to say anything bad. There's not much to say that's bad. D.C. is a fantastic city. As Reggie said, it is small, so it's almost like a village. There's lots of overlapping of people. I know this person. Is a lot of that. But it's such a transient city. Everybody comes through Washington, D.C. at some point or another. Because they want to go to Capitol Hill. They have meetings at Congress. They're going to the World Bank or the State Department or, embassies. There are so many reasons for the world to come to Washington, D.C. It is an incredibly cosmopolitan city. There is someone from everywhere here. So there's an opportunity to find a way to feel at home, but then also not feel at home. So I think in that sense, it is a great city. In terms of law, because everybody has an office here. So because the federal government is based here, everybody has an office here. All the major companies have an office here. And so in terms of law, there is you name it, there is an opportunity to practice whatever kind of law it is that interests you. There are offices of major corporations, the major law firms. Everybody is in Washington. So there are few other cities where that is the case.
Right. And if I may echo, not being from Washington, D.C., one thing I really appreciate about the city is how progressive it is. To your point, I think it is a transient city, but there's 5 major universities in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So there's always an influx of new energy. There's always a vibrancy. There's always also an open-mindedness to DC that I think you don't necessarily get in a city in a city as small as DC. It's also a very international city. There are 3 major airports within 30 minutes of DC. There's a lot of ways. The New York is a train ride away. There are many mass transportation options inside the city and to and from the city. So it's very accessible for most people. And I don't mean just from a transportation sense, but also an economic and cultural sense. As Tania mentioned, you can find authentic cultures from around the world in the suburbs and in the city of DC, and they're welcomed here. And for a person of color, I think that DC is one of those cities where there's an expectation that we're supposed to be at the table, that we're supposed to be at conversations, that we're supposed to be in the power structure. And I think that once you get exposed to that, and once you become accustomed to and acclimated to that, then it's difficult to go to other places where when you are a lawyer and you walk into a room, that people are surprised that you're not the defendant or the client, because there's so few attorneys of color in their town or in their city that, of course, the assumption is that you have to be the person being fought for or fought against, not that you can be the advocate. So I think that is not a part of the culture of DC. And I think that anyone that truly seeks equality for themselves needs to understand how that feels, because once you get a taste of that, there's no way that you stop striving to have that be a constant and a consistent part of your world.
I will, I just gonna add a little bit on that, because we work more so with undergraduate students. And I will say that, and I did not attend Howard as an undergraduate student. I'm attending Howard now in a PhD program. And it's the first time in my life that I'm in a classroom where everyone is Black. The professor's Black, all of the students are Black, and there is no need to kind of explain myself. Everybody is kind of on the same page when it comes to certain things. And that is something that I had not experienced before. And our students, when they go out into the world on study abroad programs, obviously they've come to Howard and they are expecting that type of experience, and they chose that for a reason. But when our students go out in the world on these study abroad programs, they are often one of 2 or 3 or 4 Black people of like 50 or 60 white people. And so they have a very different experience than what they had on campus at Howard. But having been on Howard's campus has really prepared them to, like, with a different, I think, a different level of confidence that allows them to, not, confront the hard questions, to bring up difficult things that might make people uncomfortable. They are very comfortable because they have had a very intentional education at Howard University that allows them to respond in a way that is effective and impactful, but confidently. And like I said, having not attended Howard as an undergraduate and attending it now, I can definitely see that there is a difference there. And I imagine that the same is true if you're a student at the law school.
Well, to that point, I think you're absolutely right. There's a cultural competency that you can only get from, well, I very carefully say from an HBCU. And I think that there's a high class of cultural competency that comes from a Howard University, because there's a responsibility that Howard has to be to work at a very high level across the board. And I have very high respect for most of our HBCUs. And so I know that Howard takes that responsibility very seriously. But to that notion, I think that one beautiful thing about Howard is that we tend to educate very bright students of color. And the wonderful thing about being a very bright student of color is that by coming to this environment, there's almost a reinvigoration and a refreshing of the idea that you're supposed to be smart. Quite often for students of color that are smart, you're typically one of the few people of color in the room most of the time, because we're only fractions of the population. But then when you're put into the room, you're usually even in a smaller representation of your group. So you start to feel that you may be the only one. You may be the anomaly. You may be the exception to the rule. And the wonderful thing about Howard is that they will put so many different people of color in the same room, and they will have different backgrounds, different perspectives, different ideals, and different goals. And you'll see that we're not monolithic, but we are all striving for the same thing. And that's the advancement of ourselves and our people, and the quest and the fight for equality. Now, I think that if you come from a country where you're used to watching people be subjugated, and you're used to watching people have their rights undermined, then Howard gives you, at least for a year or more, the ability to take a step back and see what the world could be, and then go back home and fight for that.
Awesome. I think that that ties into a great question. I know we have one from Wilmer about financial aid, but before we get to that one, I think what you just stated, Reggie, ties into the question from Diego, and basically, he says there are many African American people who have studied at Howard, but what has been their impact around the world in terms of breaking down barriers and racial and gender challenges?
Well, I think it's hard to equate, because I think sometimes advancement happens in the moment, but you don't really get a chance to assess its impact until the future. But I do know that our graduates work every day to make sure that there is equality, there's justice, there's fairness, there's advancement, and there's evolution, because there is the ability to have a better world. Now, you don't have to necessarily be the next Thurgood Marshall or the next, president of a nation to make systematic change. You can make systematic change just in the relationships that you forge with individuals. And I think that our graduates, upon leaving our institution, whether that be the medical school, whether that be the dental school, whether that be arts and sciences, whether that's going into fine arts, whether that be the law school or the business school, that our graduates leave an impact that triggers change in some way, either directly or indirectly, or they spark that flame in someone else to see that, hey, I can do this too. And I think that that's one of the amazing undercurrents of our institution, is that for most, we are still breaking barriers in ways that we didn't even imagine that we would still need to in 2020 at this point in the development of this society that we live in. And I think that it's wonderful. I've spoken on many educational panels around the world, and for years I would go down to Brazil and we would talk about civil rights and equality and justice, and helping Afro-Brazilians fight against centuries of oppression that they've watched American Africans fight through, and that our struggle has helped inform their struggle, so that they aren't taking 50, 60 years to get to where we have evolved to, that we can try to help them get there in a fraction of that time. And we're happy to do it because we truly understand that we're not free until we're all free.
I can agree with that. Another question that we'll go back to, Reggie, was from Wilmer, and it relates to financial aid. And I want to kind of put a spin on this, because in our program, one of the things that I really try to emphasize with our candidates and prospective applicants as well is that one of the best things you can do to secure financial aid is first be accepted to the program, because that opens up a lot of doors to tangible, real financial aid, as opposed to thinking about it from a perspective standpoint. Well, I'm not going to apply because I don't know if I can get the money. So what I try to profess is apply first, be accepted, and put forth the best application that you can so that you will be accepted to multiple schools. And then from that point, you're in a much better position to secure financial aid. But from your perspective, what do you think are some of the major hurdles for people who have not even applied and those that have applied and have been accepted?
Wonderful question. I think the primary hurdle with financial aid is that there are more students that need it than we have money to provide. And until we can figure out a way to make money grow from a tree or in someone's basement, then I think that will always be the struggle that's at the center of why more students of color are not pursuing advanced degrees. So TalentoTotal is a wonderful organization because they are trying to go directly to the heart of providing funding for wonderful and exceptional students, which is why we're here today, because we wholeheartedly support this program. We see this as a bridge to the future of evolution for Latino and Afro-Brazilian cultures. And we want to be a part of helping this world be a better place. And I think that this is a great step in the right direction. So anytime that we have an opportunity to have this conversation with you watching this presentation, then we're going to take it, because we know that one, maybe two, maybe 10, maybe 100 of you may eventually count yourself as alums of our institution. But that being said, we are constantly looking for partners that will help find funding for our students. One of the hurdles is that most of the funding that comes for our students in our JD program is from our federal government. Students will borrow funds or receive merit-based funding based upon academic performance into our program. So even students that receive some type of scholarship still in many cases borrow some funding. And I think one of the ultimate hurdles for Howard is that we tend to be what is considered a positive can also be a negative. We're in an amazing city like Washington, D.C., but also because D.C. is an amazing city, it's an expensive city. So even if we can keep our tuition down, that doesn't mean that we can keep the cost of the metro and the cost of food and the cost of housing down if you stay in the D.C. metropolitan area, because those are costs that aren't directly attached or tied to the university. So we do our best to keep the cost of Howard down, but the total cost of being in DC is one that far exceeds our ability to corral or maintain sometimes.
That makes perfect sense. As you said, until we can figure out how to make money grow on trees, this will always be a challenge.
And I don't say that to be flippant. I don't want anyone to think that I'm making light of the idea that, education costs money. So I want to, be very serious and very, very direct in saying that we work every day to figure out ways to knock down those barriers to access. But I think that students can't rely on the institution alone. There are a lot of third-party organizations that provide scholarships that if students research those, they can tap into those scholarships. There is the ability to first work and save some money. Even if you don't save all the money to go to school, just saving some so that you have an emergency nest egg or you have an emergency fund in case something goes wrong can be the bridge that keeps your dream from going to school from falling apart. So I think that sometimes for communities of color, we have to extend our idea of how we get to our goal because there were hurdles put in our path that aren't our responsibility, but we still have to figure out a way around them. And while institutions will do our best to help, we can't be the only source of funding for students that are trying to receive their education. And what I find most times in applications is that students get in, and then the next question is, how can Howard give me money so that I can go to school?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we want to focus on is tapping into those third-party, support systems, whether they're foundations, whether they're funds, whether they're programs through U.S. aid, the U.S. Embassy, the Fulbright, who knows? So that's one of the things that we definitely want to focus on. And I almost look at it as if you need to construct a consortium of funding sources so that you can meet the ultimate goal of being able to completely fund your organization, which in turn provides you with more professional freedom to pursue whatever you want to do afterwards. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we can work towards that goal. One of the other things that I wanted to mention, and I think it's almost time for us to wrap this up, was the notion of how do we create more awareness of the Howard University brand throughout Latin America. So my question is, when will you all be COVID-19, when that is out of the picture, when will you all be down in Bogota and Sao Paulo and Rio to kind of take the Howard University brand on the road and meet some of these talented young Afro-descendant and indigenous young people?
I was supposed to go to Brazil in March, actually, with the president, but that got canceled, obviously. I had him on the whole rounds.
Okay.
In
wow.
Salvador, Rio, and Recife. Recife. But that's not happening. So I don't know when the world is gonna come.
What you all do? I know, Tonia, you've come down. Reggie, like, you've been down to Brazil before?
I was going to come down to Colombia myself this year as well. So, and I've been to Rio and Sao Paulo quite often. So we're always trying to visit and make partnerships and forge relationships throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and wherever there's an Afro population, we're trying to support it and forge that relationship and support that relationship. So as soon as we can open up and get back on the road, I enjoy travel. I enjoy meeting parts of the family, and I can't wait to get back out there and do more of that.
No, that's awesome. And the last question, because this is really on the minds of the young people who are in the program this year, as well as something that's on my mind. What can applicants expect in terms of the COVID-19 situation at school? So, like, should they apply this December, January? If they apply, is there any kind of expectation that they will be able to start next year? Or where do you think the and I know this is very hard to predict, but like, what is the sense at Howard right now, or in the United States, with regard to how you're going to handle this, the incoming students for this year and the students who intend to apply, and kind of what is the sense of what's going on right now?
Well, I think that ideally a student definitely should apply for next fall, in part because all indications through the media, through discussions have given me the idea that a vaccine will be either in the works or in mass development sometime by the end of the year, hopefully by the beginning of 2021. If so, then that puts the student right in line to still start classes in the fall of 2021. So I think a student should plan and be optimistic, because I surely am hopeful that not only can we get back into the air as soon as possible, but that we can get into our classrooms as soon as possible. And because we are technically a full year away from the start of class in fall of 2021, then this would ideally be the time to start preparing for the application process anyway. So
Right.
Take COVID as the opportunity to really do your research, to really look into institutions. Hopefully by the spring, the world will reopen and travel will become an option again. And then we invite you to visit our campus so that you can see the beautiful campus, as mentioned earlier, and some of the resources that the law school and the university can provide. And I think if you do that and we open up, then you're right on line. Now, if we, for some reason, aren't able to open up, then what we can do is also anyone's application can be deferred to the next year. We can absorb the fact that what we're planning for may not happen, but we need to get you in the application pool and start the conversation first, so that if the opportunity is there, you can take advantage of it. And if it's not, then we can at least communicate with you, talk about options, and see what the best alternatives are at that point.
No, that's awesome. That sounds great. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. It was such a pleasure to have both of you, come on our platform today and talk about Howard University and your experiences. And I'm ecstatic, because this is the first time that we've actually had an HBCU, or historically Black college or university, come onto the platform. So kind of giving an opportunity to, students and candidates, or prospective students and candidates, to learn about the Black experience on campus, I think is very important, because for many of them, they're usually the only Black person in their classroom, or at their particular law firm. So being able to study at Howard, and as you mentioned, Tonia, in an environment where you don't have to explain yourself or why you're there, or are you qualified enough to be there, but just kind of almost being at home per se, I think is a unique experience. And I didn't go to an HBCU. My older sister did, and my two nieces went to Florida A&M. And as I was mentioning to both of you all on the call that we had previously, when I went to visit my sister, and I had to sit back and think, what did I do with my life wrong to end up in the military, at a military academy, and not at an HBCU? Because it looked like such an enriching, powerful, emotional experience. And so, I can't do it all over again, but I think a lot of the people who are in this webinar could have an opportunity to have that experience, and in another country. So I think, that's a phenomenal opportunity. And again, thank you for coming on and providing some perspective. And hopefully we can do it again in person in Brazil or Colombia or in Panama, Costa Rica, somewhere here in LATAM.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Tonia, it's always great to be on a call or a panel with you. You're amazing. And I'm so glad that Howard is fortunate to have you. And I think for the viewers watching this call, I think it's very important that, Howard is a soul experience. I think, to Jim's point, sometimes we're so used to being by ourselves that we for some reason have accepted that that's the way it's supposed to be. The most beautiful thing about Howard is that we show you that there's an alternative, that you can get a high class quality education, but also be in a nurturing environment where people expect you to be good. They challenge you to be better because they know you're capable of it, but they also are reflections of what you can be. You can look up in your professor will be a person of color. And let me add this: it doesn't mean that if you're with a person, you're not with a person of color, and they happen to be at Howard, or you're not a person of color and you come to Howard, that you won't be accepted. People that are used to being oppressed try their best not to be oppressors of others. And I think that Howard does a wonderful job of being an institution of inclusion first. So not only do we have people of color from around the world, but we also have our Caucasian brothers and sisters that are there, because the institution itself is about equality and justice, and you can't do that by oppressing other people. But there's a common mindset, and there's a common thought, and there's a common philosophy at our institution that once it's embedded in you, then it's with you for the rest of your life, and the Mecca will always live through you. So I invite you to attend our law school. I invite you to visit, because I guarantee you, once you do once, there's no way that you won't feel that you have to do it again.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining. Please give us a like, a thumbs up. Follow us. We'll have more events in the future, more webinars until we can get back on the road and do this live. But it was fantastic to have both of you here. It was fantastic to have everyone join, and we hope to do this again. So again, please give us a thumbs up, a like, follow us, and we'll have more coming very soon. So everyone have a nice day. We will talk to you soon or see you soon, and stay safe, stay healthy, and avoid COVID-19, right? See everyone later. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.